my name's Heidi Todacheene. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation, and I serve as Senior Advisor to Secretary Holland at the U.S. Department of Interior. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today to discuss the department's engagement on our tribal broadband issues. So as part of my work at Interior, I oversee the implementation of the Secretary's priorities, both on the domestic and international levels, which also includes the development and oversight of the department's broadband, radio communications, and spectrum equities. And that's where I work really closely with our bureaus on telecommunications and technology development. Our department's spectrum, broadband, and telecommunication equities include wireless services in our bureau, which includes National Park Service, our Bureau of Land Management Office, USGS, and Indian Affairs. I work with our department's leadership to help modernize the long overdue changes at our agency, especially for wireless services on tribal lands, and work with our federal family to help develop national tribal broadband and spectrum policies through our interagency work with the White House, Departments of Commerce, USDA, Social Security Administration, FCC, and others who've been engaged on resolving the digital divide on tribal lands. As one of the Secretary's priorities to advance digital connectivity in Indian country is to elevate and advance the long overdue modernization of the Interior's existing role when it comes to wireless services and new technologies in Indian country. The purpose of this expansion of tribal self-governance efforts when it comes to broadband and wireless networks, and of course electromagnetic spectrum, is so tribes can be in the driver's seat to practice self-determination in this critical issue areas in the 21st century. Generally, Interior is the agency charged with the fiduciary duty to manage tribal trust lands and best protect and promote the economic development of Indian assets to carry out the trust responsibility, especially over tribal resources. Because Interior is the agency tasked with overseeing Indian lands and their resource management, we have a specialized land management data that includes landowner information, rights-of-ways, land lease information, and services offered through our BIA Geospatial Mapping and Data Collection Office. In relation to the Interior Specialized Tribal Land and Resource Management data, there was a comment made yesterday about the future expansion of the data to include BIA road inventories and multi-dwelling units in Indian country to create better tribal land coverage maps for wireless services, which is a place where the department can enhance coverage maps through our special land management tools and collaboration with other agencies. Internally, our Indian Affairs team is also looking at expanding our 638 contract services to modernize self-determination efforts like the inclusion of LiDAR services on tribal lands, since these tools are especially important due to changing climate temperatures and the federal government's obligation to advance our tribal trust responsibility. Mapping over tribal lands is crucial not only for federal funding purposes, but also to understand ownership and connectivity rates of wireless services on tribal lands. It is particularly important in dealing with electromagnetic spectrum licenses because they're measured geographically everywhere in the country and their finite resources. And this includes on tribal lands as well. Precise land mapping tools and data exchange with tribes is also critical since tribal lands are the most disconnected areas in the country, especially when you compare them to urban areas. The digital divide in Indian country, coupled with the federal government's lack of developed or outdated mechanisms to promote tribal self-management and development of wireless networks on their own lands, is something that everyone in this room can work together on. As we all know, tribal self-governance to advance digital connectivity is critical since tribes have some of the highest rates of violent crime, lowest rates of accessible health care, disproportionate unemployment rates, and yet they still have the lowest wireless connectivity in the country. We've seen the advantages of what can happen when tribes have access to resources to build wireless infrastructure networks on their own lands, and there are many technological opportunities that have yet to be explored since many rural locations remain disconnected, preventing Indigenous students in these locations from engaging in the tech sector for our next generation. Issues like these are why the Interior is working hard to modernize the department and align with the technological development on tribal lands, which has been, again, very long overdue as part of the federal government's responsibility. For example, in November during the White House Tribal Nation Summit, Secretary Haaland announced the establishment of the Office of Indigenous Connectivity and Technology to assist in the development of new wireless services and technologies on tribal lands, including our electric vehicle initiative that our Office of the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs is working to carry out. Our team is currently underway of establishing the Office of Indigenous Connectivity and Technology under our Indian Affairs Bureau, and this will help to manage tribal coordination and communications, national policy development with our federal family partners, and development of other digital equities, as I mentioned earlier, the LiDAR services. And this especially will relate to the development of tribal land data collection and mapping. Because Interior has specialized tools for Indian lands, we have critical data, again, not available at other federal agencies, which is a key component to connectivity maps for wireless services on tribal lands and information sharing with tribes. For example, where tribes have no street or home addresses, that's where Interior's data can provide detailed information about in line with Indian Affairs' current responsibilities over Indian lands. This information will include landowner information, existing rights-of-ways and leasing, environmental reviews, and geospatial data support that already exists at Interior. Additionally, the main priorities of setting up the new Office of Indigenous Connectivity and Technology will also include exploring the scope of self-governance opportunities for tribes to license unused federal spectrum over tribal lands for commercial development purposes, implementing interagency coordination and policy development for tribal lands, as outlined in the 2002 Memorandum of Understanding that was also announced at the White House Tribal Nation Summit between Interior, FCC, and the Commerce Department. Also, the office will continue to work on standing up new technology opportunities like the electric vehicle initiative that I mentioned previously. Because Interior already works with the FCC and Communications Department, the FCC and Commerce Department on spectrum agreements for tribal self-governance services through the implementation of BIA and BIE services. The new Office of Indigenous Connectivity will also help advance the Secretary's obligation to provide tribes with reliable self-governance services on tribal lands in the 21st century. Additionally, our interagency coordination is advancing to include tribal equities for the first time where they've historically been left behind, such as national policy development and high-level decision-making to expand digital resources on tribal lands. It is part of the department's long-standing responsibility to ensure that the federal government consults with tribal nations as sovereign entities to obtain free, prior, and informed consent regarding decisions impacting tribal lands and resources as a self-governance principle. However, with the deployment of wireless services and networks and recent changes in technology, tribes have been inadvertently left behind in the digital divide in this country over the last couple decades. But through this administration and under the Secretary's guidance, we're working together to ensure that we uphold these federal responsibilities to Indian countries so tribes can get access to the resources that they need to set up networks and help operate and further their self-governance initiatives. This governmental coordination is especially important since there are many cross-jurisdictional efforts that must take place at the state, tribal, and federal level, which we all know from prior experience can be kind of difficult, especially depending on where tribes are located and what services, administrative support that they have as well. In addition to these larger administration policy initiatives, Interior is also carrying on our normal course of action on several items, including the BIA's allocation of the Office of Indian Economic Development's National Tribal Broadband Grant. OIED, or our Economic Development Office under BIA, solicits proposals from eligible federally recognized tribes to improve economic development and commercial opportunities on tribal lands. And this also works to help meet emergency needs, law enforcement, help self-employment, and then also this grant funding can be used to further support feasibility studies and deployment or expansion of high-speed internet on tribal lands. Additionally, we're continuing to collaborate with NTIA for its work on the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. Interior currently serves as a consulting agency for environmental laws like NEPA or implementing authority to grant rights-of-ways under the grant program. For example, we worked together through the BIA on a national policy memorandum last year to make the rights-of-way review and approval process more efficient to help implement the TBCP funding and also ensure that the infrastructure projects move along efficiently. Lastly, but importantly, Interior is also working on the implementation of the new MOU that was announced during the White House Tribal Nation Summit in conjunction with our new office. And that is our MOU with the Commerce Department and FCC to explore electromagnetic spectrum opportunities on tribal lands and further coordinate interagency planning for tribal equities. And then, of course, continue the facilitation of our communications with Indian country for other programs like the recent E-rate expansion, and then also the ACP program. The new MOU provides a framework to explore new opportunities to develop wireless services and intergovernmental coordination, including exploring spectrum access and data exchange over tribal lands, and support tribal political and self-determination efforts in the modern era. The next steps in this implementation include additional coordination and discussions with our agency partners on how the federal government can continue to meet the needs to tribes, bolster our resources, and help develop economic development opportunities on tribal lands. Again, I just want to thank NTTA for having me here today to discuss and update folks on some of the work that the Department of Interior is starting to do to help modernize our department, but also some of the coordination efforts that we are engaging in with our federal partners and other agencies that I know are here today as well to provide an update on some of the work that we're moving ahead. And I'd love to hear back from whoever's interested, and I'll leave my email address up here. All right, questions?
One question. Okay, your hand went up first.
So with the mapping, that is something that we're building into our new office. Where we are when implementing our new office internally is we're working to get office descriptions written up, which we've already done, and then we're coordinating our bureau offices right now to help support and organize how our spectrum resources and broadband works across our different bureaus and agency leadership right now. And so as part of the mapping tool, we do have some overlapping equities with some of our other bureaus, and then helping to consolidate that information as part of the connectivity maps that this administration is continuing to work on, and then other data that's currently available publicly is something that we're gonna have to figure out how to basically overlay our systems and help get that information just to be a little bit more precise. So we're looking to bolster the information that's already available.
All right. I do have one question, and that is about this overlap conditions. We might have multiple providers that might be putting in for tribal lands. And, you know, who's going to resolve all these issues, especially when it comes to funding? You might get denied funding just because somebody else put in for just a little piece of your land. So, you know, how do we resolve that? Will you guys be in the middle of that? It's kind of a trust responsibility for tribes to go to somebody to kind of help mediate that. So hopefully we can rely on your department to help mediate a lot of these kind of problems that are going to happen in the future.
Yes, and on that, because of Interior's historic role in working with tribes, managing assets, and everything that I mentioned previously, that's where the new office is getting set up to help coordinate some of these issues. Not only that, but on a variety of issues that have popped up, and so, or not popped up, but had been developing over time. And so that's where our main touch point through our 12 BIA regional offices that connect with all 574 federally recognized tribes, and then also with the Native Hawaiian homelands, is where Interior can start pulling together agencies in Indian country to help coordinate some of these issues and find solutions. So again, we can just kind of start modernizing the federal government in a way that is really carrying out that federal trust responsibility with tribes and to tribes, and making sure that at least with our department, there's a place where these issues can be addressed for the first time. I think we all know that I can safely say that I think in Indian country, the federal government's not known for being on the cutting edge of modernization and technology, at least for Interior. And so this is just where the Secretary Holland saw an opportunity to help develop tribes and get some new opportunities rolling with some new ideas. And so that's where we're looking to fit in there.
Great. One more, I see one from the FCC.
So you mentioned just a question about the new office. The broadband office or connectivity office. Is there going to be, and you mentioned spectrum and other areas you're focusing on, is there going to be a right-of-ways component in that new office? Because I know that it is an important issue in deployment.
Thank you, Derek. So with the rights-of-ways issue, so right now under our Bureau of Indian Affairs, rights-of-way review and processing already takes place for a variety of projects in Indian country, anything that basically impacts tribal lands, and that's through our Office of Trust Services. And so yes, the office is going to be primarily geared towards helping with broadband, wireless services, connectivity issues. Trust services will always have review over the rights-of-ways. And so as part of the department's choice to implement the office or under Bureau of Indian Affairs, part of that work is going to be working together was not only that office, but several offices to help get issues coordinated and making sure that we're staying up to date on issues like rights-of-ways.